Our speaker today is Anne Lambert. Anne is recently retired from Dawson College here in Montreal, where she was a teacher of English literature for almost 30 years, and where for the last 13 years, she wrote, directed, and produced shows with the Dawson Theatre Collective. She is the co-founder of Théâtre West End in Montreal, which was launched in the spring of 2019. Now, it is dedicated to producing work and new work that brings together an intergenerational community of both emerging and experienced theater artists. Anne's first novel, The Birds That Stay, was published in 2019 and was a finalist for the Concordia Best First Book Prize that same year. Her second book in the series, The Dogs of Winter, was published in the fall of 2020 and was a finalist for the Canadian Crime Writers Award of Excellence. Both these books were released as audiobooks in the fall of 2020, narrated by Anne herself. And The Dogs of Winter won an audiophile award in 2021. Anne has also written over 20 plays for the stage and radio, over 40 years in the theater. Several of her plays, including The Wall, Self-Offense, Parallel Lines, Very Heaven, and Two Short Women, have been formed in Canada, the United States, Europe, and Australia. Anne is the former head of the Playwriting Program at the National Theatre School of Canada. She is also vice president of the Teresa Foundation, which is dedicated to supporting AIDS orphan children and their grandmothers, the education of Malawian girls, and alleviating food insecurity in several villages in Malawi. She lives in Montreal and in St. Lucie in the Laurentides, with her husband, David, who's a school principal, and their dog, Lucy, which we must acknowledge that. She is a playwright, a librettist, which I had to look up, who is a person who writes the text for an opera or other long vocal work. So we've all learned something today. And also a video game writer. Her son Isaac is a high school social sciences teacher. And with that, Anne, I'll pass it over to you, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Great. Thank you. Can everybody hear me all right?
Yes, very well.
Great. I'm just going to close. I just have some construction people here. Hang on. Close that. Of course, today of all days. Well, thank you all for inviting me to talk about the books that I've written in the last few years. And so I really appreciate it for you reaching out to me. I think my brother came and spoke to you. Is that possible? About the Teresa Foundation?
Yes.
My brother, Brian? Yeah. So that's great. So as we're keeping it in the family, that's wonderful. So yeah, I don't quite know how you want me to structure this, but Tony and Jim mentioned to talk for about 15-20 minutes, and then people could ask questions. But if you feel an urge to ask me a question as I'm speaking, I don't mind that. I think this is sort of an informal, fairly informal kind of exchange. So something's not clear, please go ahead. So yeah, I always sort of wonder, how to introduce these books, and I think maybe one of the best ways is to just discuss a little bit what I did with a good chunk of my life. Sorry, I'm going to turn that off. And that was to write and direct plays. And so for my life in the theater, which started when I was 25 and I just turned 65, so that's 40 years, I really was interested in theater that told a story about individuals, but individuals caught up very often in larger social and political issues. I'm really drawn to those where our individual lives sort of collide with the world we live in. And I've written about 20 plays that, to a greater or lesser degree do that. But I was thinking of shifting gears a little bit when as I grew older. I'm going to steal from Leonard Cohen here, but in 2017, I turned 60 and I was just a crazy kid with a dream. And, I decided that I would try my hand at writing a novel. So I had an idea for a novel in mind for quite a few years, actually. And I wanted it to be a coming of age story. I wanted to tell a coming of age story set in Montreal in the West Island where I grew up. And I wanted to set it in the 1960s. and follow this character who grows up in the 60s and 70s in the West Island as Quebec came of age, as Quebec, of course, had the Quiet Revolution, and then the rise of the Parti Québécois, and then the mass exodus of basically everyone this character knows down the 401 to Toronto and points west. And it was really that. It was a sort of a dual individual and sort of political coming of age story. And so I had that idea. And I wrote a bunch of stories, and then that sort of ended up in that book, but it just wasn't landing. And so I am a big fan of murder mysteries. And so I thought, oh, maybe I'd like to sell this book as well, because, you know, a 6-year-old woman writing a coming of age story set in the West Island of Montreal is not exactly like, you know, publishers falling over themselves to buy this. So there was always an act of violence at the heart of the original story anyway. And so it wasn't that much of a leap for me to kind of take that act of violence and insert it into the sort of the beating heart of the story and then let it go from there. So The Birds That Stay is my first novel of this series. That's it here. And it wasn't intended to be, now it's become a 3-book series. I had no intention that this would be a 3-book series. I really just wanted to write this one book and see if anyone would publish it. And so let me just tell, have any of you read these books? I can't see you, so it's a kind of moot question. But anyway, I'll just assume you haven't. So in The Birds That Stay in this book, I have 2 main characters that run through the 3 books. And one is Romeo Leduc, who is the head of homicide for Saint-Jérôme, for the Saint-Jérôme district, and Marie Russell. She's a marine biologist and a college professor. She teaches at Dawson. And in The Birds That Stay, these 2 characters get together to solve a murder in a little village in the Laurentians. That would be Saint Lucie, where I live. And then this takes them on a wild ride to dig up a secret from Marie's past in the West Island on this quiet suburban street she lives on. And then this journey takes us back into even darker days, back in Canadian history in after World War II. And I'm not really going to tell you about that because I think I kind of ruined the book for you. So it's a bit hard talking about murder mysteries because it's not like I can go in a big discussion of the plot, because then the experience is destroyed should any of you read these books. So that was the idea with The Birds That Stay. And once again, I wanted to tell the story. Marie Russell is the main character. And I wanted to look at, a whole bunch of ideas, but certainly one was something that the Greek dramatists always understood and communicated so well. And because I'm an English teacher, of course, I did teach the Greek dramatists. I taught Oedipus Rex and, all of them. The idea that history repeats itself when people fail to tell the truth and acknowledge what really happened. And so, and this is a theme, to be honest, that runs through all 3 of the books. They all address truths that are not told, or things that are not revealed, or things that are repressed or denied, that sooner or later will come to the foreground, sooner or later will have to be acknowledged. So in The Birds That Stay, there is the murder of an older woman, and then Marie's neighbor up in St. Lucie, an 84-year-old woman, and that leads her and Romeo to uncover this whole network of lies and betrayal that goes back to the 1970s and further back. And the book looks at also, I was very drawn to a few themes, and one was the idea of the apparent innocence of a West Island street in the 1960s, because I think a lot of us, and I'm going to guess a lot of people in this room, get quite nostalgic about the 60s and 70s and think it was just all terrific and the world's gone to hell, and but it's not true. I mean, where I grew up, people didn't talk about it, but there was rampant alcoholism and physical abuse in families, and there was gendered violence and all sorts, and of course the way women had to leave their lives in those years. And so the book looks at that, to family dynamics, to again this sort of larger theme that goes back to the Second World War, but also I was really interested in placing my main character, Marie, in a situation where her kids, she's divorced, so she's dealing with the fallout of the divorce. Her kids are grown, but they're in their 20s, so she's still basically raising them. And but her mother, she's forced with the decision to sell her family home and put her mother in a residence because her mother has medium sort of onset Alzheimer's. And I really wanted to look at that because I had a lot of friends who were dealing with that with one parent or another. So that's sort of there's several plot lines that run through The Birds That Stay. And so that's basically what the book looks at. Jim and Tony, if you'd like me to read something, I'm happy to read something from the book if you like. I don't know if you'd like me to do that or just keep talking or but anyway, I can keep going if you like.
I'll leave it up to you, Anne. If there's a particular passage or something that you think would be relevant, by all means, go ahead. Otherwise, we are in your hands.
Okay, it's more a time thing. It's just
you're good for time.
So maybe I'll read you. How long is this? Yeah, maybe I'll read you the very first. It's actually the prologue to The Birds That Stay, and it's short. So maybe I'll read that and just give you a sense of.
Go for
it. The very beginning. So this is from The Birds That Stay, and the little opening sort of epigram is, "When will redemption come? When we grant everyone what we claim for ourselves." She was just settling into her evening tea, a minty concoction she made herself from that wildly invasive plant that threatened everything trying to survive around it. She sank into her ancient armchair and realized she'd forgotten her crossword puzzle from that morning in the kitchen. She heard a noise outside. Then she heard it again. Must be that pesky porcupine that liked to chew on the side of her house. She wasn't unsympathetic to it. All rodents had to constantly keep chewing as their incisors never stopped growing. Porcupines too. She just wondered what it was about her cabin that appealed to this one so much. The wood stain, the salt in the wood stain, because it was there. The upside to this was she was offered a close-up view of a distracted animal, one she could photograph and then recreate in charcoal at her leisure afterwards. She peered out into the blue light of dusk. It came earlier and earlier now, and she had to brace herself for the low-grade depression that stalked her from November to March, when the light returned. Nothing there, but still she called for Kutya to join her. Just the presence of a dog, even a toothless, timorous one, could often persuade a wild animal to abandon its mission. She lifted her plaid jacket from its hook and slipped into her old leather boots by the back door. It was probably 5 below zero out there tonight, and the chill no longer seeped into her bones. It invaded them with sticks and knives. She stepped outside and took in the cold air. It was as though the season was changing at that very moment. The stars were just coming out. A crescent moon dangled low in the southeastern horizon. How many more nights would there be like this? She shone her flashlight along the edge of the house where it met a few tufts of rogue weeds, now brittle underfoot. There was nothing there. She turned to another sound behind her, and then she understood. So that's the prologue. Dun, dun, dun.
And we know what happened.
Well, now you got to read the book. After The Birds That Stay came out, it was quite well received. And so my publishers asked if I would write another one of these things. And that was sort of exciting and horrifying simultaneously, because I really feel like I put everything I kind of knew into The Birds That Stay. Like, I sort of wished I'd saved some of the stories about the characters in The Birds That Stay and kept them for the other books, because I really didn't anticipate writing another book. So so that's what happened. It was kind of, of course things start stewing and you start realizing, oh, I can write these characters forever. So I started on the second book called The Dogs of Winter, which is this book. And The Dogs of Winter I decided I didn't want to set the book in the Laurentians again, because already my publishers wanted me to call these the Laurentian mysteries. Excuse me. And I didn't want to be kind of stuck in the Laurentians necessarily. So I really wanted to set The Dogs of Winter in Montreal. And I really wanted Montreal to be a character in this book. And I think if you read the book, you'll recognize that Montreal is very much a character in this book. And so in The Dogs of Winter, which is book number 2, Marie, Russell and Romeo team up to catch a killer who is targeting the homeless people on the frigid streets of Montreal. It takes place right in the middle of a snowstorm in January, but their investigation is complicated by public indifference to the issue and systemic racism in the police force. Meanwhile, Marie has a star student she's teaching at Dawson College who's the victim of a terrible assault. And the final sort of plot line is Marie and Romeo have to make a big decision about their lives together. So again, I really like having several sort of one main plot and then several sort of subplots running along. And The Dogs of Winter, it's interesting. With The Birds That Stay, I really in some ways wrote what I knew. I wrote about people from my past, of course, I think pretty well disguised, but you know, I took composites of many people from growing up in the West Island as I did, with a Francophone mother and unilingual Anglophone father. People from growing up out there, people I've met through my many years, and smooshed them all into all these different characters. So I really was writing from a place of intimate knowledge. With the exception of one plot in the book, which I can't talk about, that actually required a lot of research, and I learned a lot about what Canada got up to after the Second World War. In The Dogs of Winter, I really wanted to write about, again, as I said, this idea, what happened to homeless people and what was going on in our city that we tolerated this kind of situation around Cabot Square, which is very close to Dawson College and Atwater Library. And I also wanted to find a way to kind of get the Me Too revolution that was happening at the time into the book. So The Dogs of Winter is really about what happens when you know, I looked into this and I discovered that 40% of the people around Cabot Square the homeless are Inuit. I looked into the reasons why they end up in the places they do, why we as a society don't respond to that adequately. And one of the many things I discovered in my research was that there's very little written about this topic, that there is breathtaking ignorance on the part of most people regarding First Nations and Inuit Indigenous issues, that we all have our heads in the sand, including myself, that I think a lot of people mean well, but simply don't know what to do, and feel that the issue that we're all facing together as a society is so big, we don't really know how to respond to it. So if I have time, would you like me to read you something from Dogs that maybe gives you a sense of it's a little bit of a sense of the book, but also that where the character's coming from. Now I just have to find it, so just hang on a second. So there's many characters in this book. There's a homeless couple who run away. There's an Inuit. It's an Inuit woman who is killed at the beginning of the book. There's Marie and Romeo back again. Marie's family. Like it's really kind of a big sort of glorious landscape, a canvas I got to paint on.
You got something that gives us a sense of Cabot Square?
Yeah, well, I don't know that this will, but this will give you a sense of Dawson. So just trying to find it. And of course, now I can't find it, and I should have marked it. And just a second. No, that's it. Sorry, just a second. Trying to find this part about why Marie. Oh yeah, here it is. Okay. This is in the middle of chapter, I don't know, one chapter early in the book. So just understand that this is not the beginning of the chapter at all. But let's see. Yeah, here, I'll start here. Marie's teaching at Dawson, and she's decided to go get her coffee that she needs. Marie decided to cross over to the mall by the underground metro level, her preferred route in winter, as she didn't have to actually go outside and wouldn't need her full cold weather regalia. Besides, the aftermath of the snowstorm, snowbanks 3 feet high and sidewalks still not fully cleared, made stepping out into the January air even less appealing. She emerged from the Dawson doors into the actual metro station and passed by the Jehovah's Witness couple flogging their version of Christianity, who still looked so hopeful that she might stop for a little proselytizing. She could already taste that cafe latte with an extra shot of espresso. Maybe she'd treat herself to one of those blueberry oatmeal squares that cost a fortune and about 8,000 calories. Between the metro turnstiles and the shopping center proper, this part of Alexis Neon Mall was known for its high concentration of homeless people. Marie recognized some of them from over the years, and some were more transient, their faces changing every few months. A few of the regulars were there, their empty Starbucks or Tim Hortons coffee cups held aloft, begging for a loonie or a toonie. A couple of them were passed out inside filthy sleeping bags, their few possessions gathered around them in tired plastic bags. Sometimes one would begin to shriek aggressively at a shopper, but for the most part, they were harmless, too drunk or high or sick to be a threat to anyone, except sometimes to each other. Marie always walked quickly past what she called the gauntlet of guilt on her way to her daily coffee. She passed the first guy who wished her bonne journée with a cheery wave and a snaggletooth grin. Another regular, an old woman swaddled in layers of mismatched clothes and a floral babushka on her head, lifted her cup and smiled weakly at Marie, mumbling something in a language Marie didn't understand. She used to stop and ask how they were. She always used to drop some change into their cups, and every now and then she still did. But over time, a feeling of frustrated helplessness had eroded her empathy. She wanted to ask what had happened to them that brought them to this state and this place. She wanted to ask what she could do, but she didn't. Instead, she held her purse a bit tighter and hastened past them, making just enough eye contact to remind herself that they were human too. So that's the short passage that maybe gives you a sense of Alexis Neon and the character of Marie and the book. And so the other character in The Dogs of Winter, the other main character is a young woman named Michaela. And I can't really talk about her too much either, except to say that I was very drawn to, when I was doing the research, there's a lot of gendered violence against homeless people as well. And I really wanted to look at gendered violence in a sort of broader context. And as I mentioned earlier, the Me Too movement was really reaching a kind of crescendo just as I was writing this book. And, Weinstein had been arrested. Bill Cosby, the horror story of Bill Cosby had come to the fore, who I'm sure for almost everyone in this room was a hero when we were kids. There's a very well-known local Quebec guy too, who finally, after I think 30 years of raping women, was finally arrested. So he was sort of the inspiration for the character in my book, whose name Jean-Luc David. So I really wanted to explore that, and what interested me was, and one of the reasons I wrote the book was that when I was doing my research, there were these two young women who were found dead in, I think it was the summer of 2018, two Inuit women, one in Dorval was found hanging and another one in Cabot Square. And when I looked into it, the police didn't even investigate their deaths. One was definitely a homicide and the other one was still uncertain. And I remember at the time thinking, why is it that my daughter, who at the time was 27, as was the same age of these two Inuit women, they were 27 years old, why is it that my daughter, who's white, gets to live her life, gets to have a full life with every opportunity she could possibly have, and that these two women, by just sheer accident of a birth lottery, even when they were killed, the police wouldn't even bother investigating. And that's what really drove me to sort of look into this particular story that became The Dogs of Winter. So yeah, I meant to mention that a little bit earlier. So if this all sounds really depressing and grim, which I really think it does, they're actually, if people who've read the books actually find them quite funny. They are not without humor. I am a big believer in no matter what kind of story you're telling, if there's no humor, you may as well just go home. I felt that way in the theater. You know, as soon as you start preaching and telling people what to think and feel, it's game over, as from my perspective as an artist. So there is humor in these books. I don't know if it's knee slapping humor, but it's certainly wry humor. And I think some pretty funny moments. Yeah, I would I would definitely say that. There was something else I wanted to say about dogs and now I've forgotten it. Oh, well, I forgot what I was going to say about that. But yeah, so that's The Dogs of Winter. And then, well, you know, I guess I had another book in me. So I decided to start working on, this was during COVID. I decided to start working on this, the third book, which is coming out in on September 20th. So this is hot off the press. This is called Whale Fall. I guess you've probably noticed the theme. So I guess the gimmick is there's an animal in every title of the books. The Birds That Stay was that title was picked years before I wrote the book. I'm a big bird watcher, and I particularly love the birds that stay in winter. And so I wanted to call the book that, and it becomes in the book, it becomes a metaphor for all kinds of things, but certainly for the people who stayed when the PQ came into power and everybody went down the road. It's kind of a tribute to those people who stuck around. It's also meant to honor people who, you know, who stick it out when things are really tough, who stay, who stay emotionally connected to people or help people out, not unlike the Rotary Club, I imagine. So that was the idea for that book. The Dogs of Winter, dogs are featured prominently in the plot of The Dogs of Winter. So that was a bit of a no-brainer, as are whales in Whale Fall. Yeah, so I just wanted to say also about combining sort of, so I think, you know, I think it would be safe to say that all my books have a pretty vivid sense of place, and weave individual and personal stories against a larger social and political landscape. And doing that, I've learned over the years, you have to thread that needle very carefully, so that you don't alienate people again by telling them what to think and feel. You know, that you cannot be didactic, but by the same token, I had to introduce ideas and concepts and actually facts about what happened, let's say in Birds That Stay and Dogs of Winter, that maybe the average person wouldn't know, because I certainly didn't know it before I researched the books. And that is the challenge, one of the challenges, I think, in writing these kinds of books. And of course, having some kind of humor in the book as well. Yeah, so the third book, Whale Fall, is in some ways of the three, the simplest book, because I think plot-wise, it was certainly the easiest to write in terms of plot, I'd say. Oh, I also wanted to mention about The Dogs of Winter. In The Birds That Stay, I mentioned, like, this was writing from a place of something I knew and wanted to explore and tell the story, you know, craft a story about. In The Dogs of Winter, I really wanted to write about what I didn't understand and wanted to understand. And as a playwright, I've always tried to do that too. You know, what is it? What is the impulse that drives someone to do something terrible, or drives someone not to act when they know something is wrong, or to get caught up in these complicated family dynamics that one can't escape from? And that was really important to me, that in Dogs of Winter, I took a very close look at something that feels very close to my heart. In Whale Fall, I was sort of back to something in some ways I knew a little bit, because Whale Fall is about, well, I'll tell you the plot of it. If it's okay, I'll just read from the back of the book. This is the third Russell and Leduc mystery. Marie Russell and Detective Romeo Leduc are finally getting married. Oops, oh well, gave that away. But the joyous occasion is overshadowed by the unexpected arrival of Magnus Sorensen, renowned eco-warrior and Marie's first great love. When Magnus's plans for a dramatic environmental protest take a dark turn, Romeo and Maria are forced to abandon their honeymoon in the Laurentians to catch a killer, unearthing long buried secrets along the way. So Whale Fall is really a book about, I think, to put it simplest, it's a book about revenge of both the human and non-human kind. So it's very much a COVID book. You know, there's people who see COVID as a kind of massive act of revenge on the part of Mother Nature. And so it was written during COVID. It was, but because it's about whale researchers, or some of the characters are whale researchers and environmental activists. I did spend about 5 years of my life, which is quite a weird thing, but I did work at a marine mammal research station off the coast of Maine. And so I actually know that world quite well. So it was a joy to write about it, because I got to kind of retell old stories from my 20s. And also, you know, write again about an issue that's close to my heart, which is the effects of climate change. The book is very much set in a world that's changing due to global warming. As I'm sure everybody in this room knows, you know, we're seeing it every day around us. I'm seeing it up in the Laurentians, just in the bird life that's changing up there, the tornadoes we've had this summer. And, you know, as Canadians, we're pretty protected by just the wealth that we have, frankly. But, you know, it's coming for us too. And so I guess the book is a little bit of a Cassandra, a little bit of a sky is falling book, but not really. Again, I think there's a lot of humor. I think there's, you know, a lot of family dynamics that are explored in the book too. So yeah, so that's Whale Fall. And I don't know, am I out of time, Jim?
Pretty well, yeah. We're getting
Okay.
along here. So I think
Okay.
we might open it up for a few questions.
Sure.
At this point. And I've got one right away.
Mm-hmm.
How does a germ of an idea of a book become a book ultimately? What are the stages that you have to go through? You said it took years.
Oh boy. Well, I mean, you know, you get I mean, I will start with a character, and then actually, to be honest, I usually start with something I want to write about. So, you know, the birds that say I wanted to write about growing up in the West Island, and then looking at that idea of Quebec coming of age. And it usually, for me, it starts with that. For some writers, it starts with a character and one voice in their heads. That's not how I work usually. And then you have to find the motivation to actually sit down and write the book, because that's obviously the biggest challenge. And then I usually do quite a bit of note taking and research. I do that by hand. I'll write usually like sort of all my notes by hand. I have this big leather notebook that I just write in that I'm very sentimental about. And then I do this. I take these. These are all calendars. And you know those desk calendars you buy at Bureau and Grow? And I just fill them in. See, those are chapter numbers with squares. And I map out the whole book before I start writing it. Or at least I'll map out maybe the first 3/4 of it, because I don't necessarily know how it's going to end. That's the only way I can write. I'm one of those people who needs to know where I'm going. You know, if you're with me in a car, I don't like wandering. I like knowing where I am and where I'm headed, which is why I hate Google Maps. I like old-fashioned maps that I can start at a point and look on the map to where I'm going. So I'm the same way as a writer. So that's, but, you know, really most of it is just the motivation to actually sit down and do it, because, you know, I know a lot of writers who don't write. And in the end, the only way to be a writer is to write.
So I guess I'm never going to be a writer, and you're never going to want to drive with me. Anybody else want to butt in here?
I'm wondering, when you do compose or start writing the novels, do you use a typewriter or do you write it by hand?
I use a computer. Yeah, no, I don't write by hand. Once I'm starting the book, I don't write by hand at all. It's too long. I have a little laptop that I'm actually going to get a new one this afternoon, because all the keys are smushed away. The one I'm talking to you on now, there's only the Z and the X and the Q and the K and the J left. That's this 8-year-old computer.
I have a question. Have any of these changed you?
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Have any of the characters that you write about changed you?
Oh, that's such a good question. Oh, it's such a good question. I would think so. I think certainly, when you try to get into a character's head who's had a very different life experience from your own, has very different circumstances, I hope I'm more empathetic than I was, more sympathetic, a little more able to see the gray areas and the big picture than maybe I was. I think that's something that comes with age anyway. I think we all live in those gray areas a little bit more as we turn grayer. Yeah, I think so. I don't know if I could name a specific character. I certainly love the characters, and I certainly try to make none of them, even the killers, pure blackness, pure evil. I just had a friend tell me he read the books, and he said that he really appreciated that about the characters, that they weren't, even the ones that were up to no good, there was backstory to them. There were certain circumstances that didn't necessarily justify the behavior, but certainly might lead one to an understanding of the behavior. Did that answer your question?
Definitely.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
When you say you made the notes or your books, you did it on a calendar. Why did you use a calendar?
Just because they have those little squares,
So is it like a historical thing? You said on this day I did this, or is
No,
it?
no. It has nothing to do with the date. It's just, I like the little squares. So what I do is, like, I don't know if you can see, but like, actually, this isn't even from the book. This is something else. But, just say it would be chapter 1 here, right? And then I will, in quick note form, write what has to happen in that chapter. I do it in pencil so that maybe I'm in chapter 10 and I look back to my little bullets in chapter 1 and think, oh no, that's not going to work, because
So it's just the fact that they're squares.
yeah, because writing a book or a play, for that matter, is a bit like building a wall, right? Those bricks have to go in a particular order, and if they don't, or you pull one out, the whole thing can fall. It's actually more architectural than people might think. So especially a murder mystery, because I don't know if any of you read murder mysteries, but
Yep.
I have to do a few things, right? I have to have a murder. Then I have to create the murderer. Then I have to create at least 2 to 3 red herrings, right? And they have to be convincing. So there's a whole host of things that I have to do to keep the more sophisticated reader engaged, right? Because otherwise they're just going to pack it in. So so there's a challenge there. So sometimes, like, I remember at the end of The Dogs of Winter, there was a whole thing that had to happen, and I just couldn't figure out how to make it happen. So that's kind of the fun too, is sitting there going, how the hell am I going to make this thing happen without it being, predictable or stupid or not earned, right? Because when I read any kind of book or see a play, I very much don't like an unearned ending, one that hasn't been worked for, that hasn't been, methodically plotted, leading to its inevitable conclusion. When something gets parachuted in, I always feel a little cheated.
And I found your presentation wonderful and very entertaining, and I'm going to look for the books.
Great. They're available online. You can order them. They're available at Indigo and all sorts of stores around. And Whale Fall is coming out on the 20th. And it should be in bookstores. I think it's in some bookstores now, actually. But if any of you go to Kidlink on Monkland, it's there. And I'm trying to get them all into Hog Hardware in Westmount. That's been a bit of an epic journey. But they're at Indigo and Chapters and, all over the place.
I was in Kidlink yesterday.
Oh, you were? Oh, you should have bought my books.
Well, I have to go back now that I know about them.
They're great. They're such wonderful people.
Yeah.
They're like big promoters. They sell tons of my books because they're just, sit there going, you should try this. You should read this. So they're just and they're lovely people besides that. So yeah, it's a great store, great toy store that sells books.
Excellent. Anybody else have a question?
I got another one here, which is through your teaching and your writing, do you have any favorite authors yourself?
Oh yeah, so many. Oh boy, that's such a big question. So I mostly taught theater. So there's a whole, whack of playwrights that I love, and most people don't know any playwrights, but I really love a playwright named Tony Kushner from the United States who wrote Angels in America, which is one of the most important works of theater probably in the last century. I really love a local playwright here in Quebec called Wajdi Mouawad, who's a beautiful playwright. Judith Thompson, who's a Canadian playwright, great writer, nobody's ever heard of. In terms of novelists, oh my goodness, there's so many. In terms of murder mystery writers, I really like those dark, brooding, humorless Scandinavian novels. Henning Mankell, I love him. I love the Brits too. I love P.D. James and Ruth Rendell, and there's a whole bunch of new ones that I can't remember now, but I like the newer ones. But I really do love those kind of broody, dark landscapes of Scandinavia. I find those very appealing. I do not like gruesome, so I will not read gruesome books. My books are not gruesome. There's no careful detailing of blood and gore and all that stuff. I have no interest in that. And it's amazing when you research these books what you can find on the internet. It's just frightening what's there. So I tend to stay. I think my books are challenging in terms of the kind of maybe I don't want to say the moral demands, but sort of the self-examination maybe that my books demand of their readers, but they're not tricky in terms of disgusting details of murder and so forth. I love, the Greek dramatists. There's some plays I taught for 30 years and I would continue to teach till they take me out of Dawson in a box. The only reason I retired is because I just could not mark papers anymore. My marking odometer had already turned over about 5 times by the time I retired. I just couldn't do it anymore. So, but if all I had to do was stand and talk to 17 and 18-year-olds, I'd do it till I dropped dead. Because what better job is there in the world than teaching at Dawson College, really?
Well, I'll tell you.
Wait. Would you hang on? Would you, Anne? Would you be insulted? Some people have started calling you the Louise Penny of the Laurentians. Would that be insulting to you?
No, this is what I'd like. I'd like people to call me that, and then I'd like people to make me as famous and rich as her.
Okay. Well,
would that be okay?
Right.
Just that being said, though, I do want to say this about Louise Penny and I. I am enormously respectful of her extraordinary success. She's a beast. And I'm really jealous that she got to write a book with Hillary Clinton, but I'm going to write one with Michelle Obama. No, I'm kidding. But I think our books are actually very different. I think on the surface, they seem very similar. She has a Francophone homicide detective. Her books are set in Three Pines in this little town. For lack of a better word, I think my books, and this is a terrible word, are realer. I just think they're a little more authentic. That's what that people have told me that too. The stories I tell, I think, are a little more, I don't want to say believable. What's the word? Authentic, I think, is the right word. Because, for example, I'm sure all of you watch, if any of you watch Scandinavian murder mysteries, there's like 10 murders in this town in Iceland. Iceland has 1 murder every decade, maybe, right? So you go to a town like Three Pines where people are dropping dead like flies, Louise Penny's town. Now, obviously, we suspend that disbelief. That's a trope of murder mysteries. I don't mind. But if you read my books, I don't think there's anything that happens in them that you'd say, that's not going to happen. I think anything in my books could happen. And in some cases have happened.
But do you have a duck in your books?
I have a duck in my books?
No, do you have one? Like in Louise Penny's books?
No, but I have, so in my books, I have Marie's dogs. Marie has 2 dogs. The main character, one's named Dog, and the other one is Barney. And Barney's an ancient pug who's deaf and kind of blind now. And Dog is a rescue who's slavishly devoted to Marie. those are the two dogs. And then there's, an assortment of other critters and stuff, because I like animals. I have a dog named Lucy, named after St. Lucy, and I've had a menagerie growing up, and I like writing about animals. I think that, and this might be my next book, I'm not sure, but I do think the next big revolution is going to be what we discover about non-human animals and our interaction with them, how we consume them and how we understand them.
Cool.
I'm very happy that you no longer have to mark pages and to rate the work of your students. But,
Yeah.
I can assure you, I think if we were to take a vote here, the rating that you would receive today would be number one.
That's now I can see you all. Sorry, I was on speaker. Yeah, thank you so much. Look, I love teaching. I don't think it was a dream career. I never really had any plans, to be honest. As a young woman, I was sort of like, I don't know, vaguely bohemian and like drinking a lot and smoking and talking in cafes and changing the world from a chair. I had no idea I was going to end up a teacher for 35 years and, get into theater. And anyway, it's a very bizarre life, the way that the little turns it takes and the sort of unexpected curves. But yeah, it was a great job, and loved every second of it. Thank you so much for inviting me today. I'm so appreciative of being able to speak about the books. I hope I didn't bore you. I hope you got a sense of them anyway. And
I think you surprised all of us. In terms of the direction that you went and the broadness of what you ended up talking about and bringing things in from real life, and not only that, and then telling us how the books are created. Just a wonderful 45 minutes we spent. And I thank you.
Well, way too long. Sorry.
Well, that's okay. I talk fast after this.
Can I just say something? I run a little theater company called Theater West End, which is in the West End of the city, and we do run writing workshops by Zoom. Right now we're doing Thursday afternoons, but we're going to be expanding in the winter. So if any of you are interested in joining our writing workshops, these are generative writing. We sit down in a room like this together and we write to 2 prompts for 10 minutes, and then we share our work or we don't. It's super fun. It's a fantastically challenging thing to do, but a really exciting thing to do. And we would especially like some men to join us. So
Right.
if any of you guys are thinking you'd like to sit and write in a room like this, it's like no pressure, but it's great. And certainly some of the women here today too. We still love women joining us. We just have like 2 men and 14 women. If any of you men would like to join us, or anybody in the room, please just send an email to Theater West End, and that's West spelt the French way. We have a website, and you can just shoot us an email and we'll respond, hopefully in a timely manner. And if you're interested, we'd love to have you. We have people joining us from all over the world. That's the glory of Zoom, from Europe and the States and other parts of Canada. And we've got quite a little community going. It doesn't matter if you think of that, oh, I can't write, because everybody can write. And so, and that is a basic, foundational belief of our workshops. Every single person has creative genius.
Well, that's good to know, because I'm a member of a group that meets every month at the CLSC at the Benny, or at the library.
To write?
Yes.
Oh, wow, that's great.
Yeah.
Good for you.
I love it.
Oh yeah,
You walk in going, I don't know what the hell's going to happen here, and then all of a sudden there's stuff pouring out of your mouth.
Exactly. Oh, Jim, I'm so glad you said that. That's exactly what our workshop members say. They go, oh my, because some days, even I'm a facilitator, I don't even want to do it. I'm like tired and crabby and whatever, COVID. And then as soon as we get in the room together, things just start happening. So anyway, no pressure. If anyone's interested, just you can actually reach me through Jim or Tony, or you can just reach us at Theater West End and let me know.
Perfect. Now we're definitely running late.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. Have yourself a
Enjoy
great
this
day.
beautiful day.
Bye now.
Bye.